Welcome to the Lean Blog Podcast. Visit our website at www.leanblog.org. Now, here's your host, Mark Graban.
Hi, this is Mark Graban. Welcome to episode 140 for March 1st, 2012. My guests today are Scott Patten and Peter Armstrong for leanpub.com, where they want to be the website for publishing what they call in-progress books. We'll be talking about lean publishing and how that's different than self-publishing, and about how leanpub.com works. And then in part 2 of the podcast, we'll talk more about how they're applying the concepts of the lean startup methodology to their service and their business. To disclose a conflict of interest, I've published 2 blog compilations via their service, a best of 2011 book, which you can find at leanpub.com/leanblog, and a best of 2012 book that's being published incrementally throughout the year at leanpub.com/leanblog2012. To learn more and to find links, go to leanblog.org/140. And as always, I want to thank you for listening. Well, I'm very happy again to have our guests Scott Patten and Peter Armstrong from LeanPub. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you for having us. Thanks for having us.
So if we just start in terms of introductions, let the listeners know what your backgrounds were before starting LeanPub. Scott, can you kick things off?
Sure. So I'm actually a physicist by training. I'm not a programmer. I don't have any conventional programmer training at all. And I was a physicist for 10 years at a company that eventually got bought by Kodak. And after a while, I decided I wanted to start my own company, do my own thing, and I looked around and I said, well, I can either get $1 million of funding and start up a physics lab, or I can buy a laptop. So I bought a laptop and got into programming, and I've been doing it full-time for 5 years now.
And Peter?
So before LeanPub, my background was as a software developer for a number of Silicon Valley companies, both working down there and then remotely from Canada, and started Rootboss, which is a company that created LeanPub about 4 years ago. 4 years ago now, and LeanPub itself is about 2 years old. So I'm a software developer. I've been doing it for about 10 years. I have a traditional CS background.
Sure, great. So before we can spend some time talking about some of the particulars of LeanPub, and I've experienced LeanPub as a publisher on the customer side, and I've worked with you guys on that. But before we get into that, can you talk about just the general idea of lean publishing? Because I think listeners, I think it'd be good to kind of cover the details about how this is different than just what we might call self-publishing or e-publishing on a platform like Kindle. What makes it lean in publishing?
Sure. Okay, so I'll have a shot at this. So lean publishing, in 5 words, is self-publishing, in-progress, ebooks. And so the idea of, people have self-published books before, people like in the publishing industry, to self-publish a print book, people derisively call that a vanity press. Mm-hmm. Self-publishing sort of has a bad rap. It's seen as sort of a second-class citizen. Now, lean publishing is a bit different. In the technical book world, some of the better computer book publishers have realized that by the time a print book exists on the shelf, it's obsolete, usually, about computer, because computer programming changes so fast.
Right.
So the idea of publishing a book before it's done does mean something that publishers such as O'Reilly, Pragmatic Programmers, Manning have been doing for technical books. But there's been nothing like that in the self-publishing space. So if you're a self-published author, you haven't been able to self-publish your book while you've been writing it. And as we got into that was what LeanPub started with. As we got into it, we realized there's actually a really interesting dynamic when you start self-publishing an in-progress book, an in-progress ebook that you're writing yourself, and you can start applying lots of the lean approaches from lean startup theory to the way you go about writing your book and publishing it.
And so, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if we want to say in practice how that works, because
I'm assuming he's following up, but yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. I mean, when you say an in-progress book, is there an equivalent to, borrowing the lean startup term, a minimum viable book?
Yes, there is. For us, we actually talk about the minimum viable book, and what the minimum viable book for us is, if it's a technical book, it's something that would save an advanced reader 1 or 2 hours. Because if you write a programming book and you save someone who's a good programmer a couple hours, like an experienced programmer, then you've saved a novice probably 10 or 20 hours. And since a programming book would sell for like $10, $20, that's like the best deal ever. And so that can be as little as like 50 pages. Like if you write, say, 50 pages about, say, a brand new thing that's just been released, like say Ember.js or something, or Node, that's worth it. And the good thing about for us, what we believe is that as soon as you have the minimum viable book, which is again something that should save someone 1 or 2 hours if they're good, then you should put it out there and iterate in public, right? And to make sure that you're building the correct thing, because what often happens when you're writing a book is if you write in private, in stealth mode, then you can end up writing a book that nobody cares about, or you can end up writing a bad book or a confusing book, or there's all kinds of ways you can go wrong. But if you use lean approaches and iterate in public, then you can build buzz, you can get meaningful feedback as you write, and the book that gets produced is a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, I love that comparison. You use the term stealth mode. For those listening who aren't involved in entrepreneurship, kind of the traditional classic approach to startups would be, pretty much to take a big batch of funding, work in secret because you don't want anyone to know what you're working on because they might go and copy it. And then you go to market and you hope you have customers. And, I know from my experience, I mean, that's pretty much how traditional publishing would work. I mean, you typically don't let anyone see the book shy of a few reviewers before it actually goes to press. So I think, that's certainly a clear parallel to Lean Startup World and what you're doing with Lean Pub. So when you talk about the process here, I mean, you're not just making little small improvements. Is it fair to say you may publish that minimum segment and then keep adding chapters?
Yeah. We believe like the book should, like a technical book, say, for example, you should publish it when you've got like, say, 2 or 3 chapters written. Mm-hmm. I mean, like even if you're going to write 20, 25 chapters.
The parallel, the lean startup minimum viable product, the thing that people always say is you should be a little embarrassed when you launch it, right? It should, if you're not embarrassed, you launch too late. Same with your book. It should be, man, this is really short. Are people really going to buy this? Are they going to get mad at me? That's what you should sort of be thinking when you hit that publish button for the first time.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this is like you think about the parallels between a book and a startup, like there's a number of them, right? Like in both cases, you have a low probability of success, right? Mm-hmm. And they're highly creative processes. And historically, people have used stealth mode because that seemed to be the best way to go about things, right? And also historically, you've had startups being funded by VCs and authors being funded by publishers,
right?
And VCs and publishers are both hit-driven businesses, and so like the publisher wants you to write a mass market thing, which may or may not be like true to what your vision for the book is. And just as a VC, for example, for them, if you're a VC firm, 1 or 2 companies will pay, will hopefully return the fund for you, and the rest will fail or just be kind of whatever. So the dynamic of the fact of where the money comes from and how has influenced how these things are built, right?
Right.
Now in lean startups, the lean startup theory, like Eric Ries's lean startup approach and Steve Blank's customer development approach have been like, okay, guys, there's a better way of doing things. You should, talk to customers, get out of the building, talk to people, and build something that people actually want and interact with them as you're building it. Stealth mode is for idiots, right? Like, actually iterate in public. And we feel the same way. Like, look, you're writing a book here, right? You're not writing, chances are it's not a PhD thesis, which is probably the only justified use of stealth mode in writing these days. Mm-hmm. It's because if someone else publishes their PhD thesis about, something similar first, you're dead, right?
Yeah.
But with the exception of that, stealth mode is totally not justified. All it does is hurt you. And for example, like if you think about, what benefit would iterating in public have? Well, when you think about what happens at a traditional publisher, you have a development editor who reads your draft as you're writing it. So the publisher is trying to simulate iterating in public by providing someone to act as your customer. Mm-hmm. Now, the development editor, if let's say it's a technical book, they don't care. They don't care about learning the material. They care about, is this a good book? Mm-hmm. And so they're not actually looking at your book trying to learn the material from it. They're looking at the book thinking, is this written well and in a clear way, and projecting themselves into the head of, say, what's this like to a beginning reader, what's this like to an intermediate reader, etc. And good ones can do this very well. But let's say you're writing in public, and iterating in public, self-publishing, lean publishing, you can actually have beginning, intermediate, advanced readers reading your book as you're writing it, right?
Yep.
And if something's confusing, guess what? They'll tell you. right? It's, you know, you don't have to have a proxy for real feedback. You can just get real feedback.
And not only that, instead of them costing money, they're giving you money.
Yeah, so you're being paid to write
they
public.
Totally bought in, like literally.
And
bought
since
into
they bought into that, since they bought in, they have a vested interest in the success of the book, right? Yeah. If I pay money for something and it confuses me, then hopefully I'll get upset and tell the author, "Hey, I tried to run this code and I don't understand. What does this mean?" Or I'm reading this business book and you're talking about minimum viable product, and what does that mean? I don't understand. So, like, that type of feedback is good, right? You know, and also, like, these people also build buzz. Like, they have Twitter accounts typically, and as you're writing in public, if you're doing a good job, they'll be tweeting about it, right? You'll be releasing early, releasing often. They'll be reading new versions, right, which they get for free, and the buzz will be growing. And you'll be building a community and a tribe, sort of as Seth Godin likes to call, around your book.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that seems like a huge benefit to help build buzz before the whole thing is out. So, you know, you're building, you know, let's say if you're the type of writer that, you know, I think, you know, in my own work, you know, I write, you know, fairly niche books for people that are trying to do healthcare improvement. And, you know, my own personal business model is not about the royalties from the books, but it's about, you know, go out and coach and consult with people. So publishing early gets you, it seems, you know, out in front of those people earlier than later, and would have all sorts of other side benefits to, you know, to people that are writing a book, kind of in that type of mode. One other question, and maybe we can tie us back into some of the details about LeanPub. You know, if somebody's going in and, you know, buying early a copy of the minimum viable book, and is that reader typically buying full price and then making a bet that the author is actually going to finish the thing and get full value out of it? You know, do people consider it, you know, a pain to have to go and download the same book multiple times? You know, if you can kind of talk through things like that.
Pricing is really interesting. Like, so it used to be, we used to get asked by a lot of people, well, what should I charge for my book? And should I charge, like, say, a little bit now when it's in progress and then, you know, raise the price later when I'm near being done?
And Mark's doing a really interesting experiment on his book too. Like the stuff you're doing on LeanPub is, we'll talk about that.
Yeah,
sure. Yeah, we'll come back to that. Yeah.
But the notion of it, so what we support now in LeanPub is every book actually has a variable price. And so every book on LeanPub has a minimum price, which can be $0. You can have your book minimum of free, or you can have a book price of a minimum of 99 cents or higher, and a suggested price. And so books have a minimum and a suggested price. When you're starting out, if you're sort of slightly embarrassed about your book, just set a low minimum price. Just say $2, $5, whatever. As the book gets better, then you can raise the minimum price if you want. And then the suggested price on LeanPub is what you suggest people should pay. When they get to the purchase page, it's just a slider, right? So the reader can just drag that slider down to the minimum, or else as high as they want, up to $100. And people actually pay more than the suggested price. Like, we've had customers paying, like, substantially more than the suggested price. You know, and so it's one of those things, like, you don't have to. You can start off your book with, like, when your book is really early, start with a low minimum price, because what you're trying to do is get feedback, trying to get, you know, get the early adopters for your ideas, right? Yeah. And so, yeah, the simplest way to do that is start with, like, a nice accessible minimum price. Like, you should say your book is worth something. So we think that free isn't the right minimum price. We think that the right minimum price should be like $2, $5, and then, you know, set a minimum price which represents what I think your goal for the book is. So if you think, like, you know what, for your suggested price, you're planning on this book being worth $10, $20, suggest that. And then the people who believe, yeah, you know what, I think this will be worth that to me, will probably pay around that. And people who feel like, oh, you know what, right now I'm not convinced this is worth, you know, I'll drag this down to the minimum, that's fine. And some people will drag the price upward. And the interesting thing, too, around pricing and stuff, is that since on the purchase page we show a slider for the price and also for the royalty, people adjust the royalty rate that the author's getting. And so when you're dragging, say, the suggested price downward, you literally see the author's royalty shrinking. So it's like you're taking money out of the author's pocket and you feel like a bad guy. Or else if you drag the money upward, you see the royalty for the author going way up. Or else you can even just grab the author's royalty slider and drag that up. And so we've seen people, like, you know, if a book costs $10, right, so the author makes $8.50, we've seen people drag the author royalty up to $10, and then they buy a book for $11.67, and we're like, why is that? And it's like, well, because then the author royalty is $10. right?
So we can see that.
So we see that behavior.
We thought, like, we played around with the concept of making like a smiley face that went to a frown or something.
we sort of were subtle about it. We changed the shade of the bar. Yeah. Like, it gets really green as it gets far out, and it goes kind of gray as it gets smaller. But yeah,
I'm sure that you need a psychologist on your team then to start.
I actually have a double major in psychology along with computer science, so I like to play that. But
we thought that was a little much. And there was another question about the frequency of updates.
Yeah, well, let's come back to that in a second. So I want to talk about the pricing just for a second. So, your leanpub.com website. Both from the publisher side and the reader side, it seems like you're iterating very often, and we'll come back to that. I don't remember seeing the slider. I remember did it used to be you could just you punched in a number?
You just type it in, we changed it to the slider about like a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so I haven't seen the slider, and I'm looking at
go to your book.
Go buy your book.
Go buy your book.
Yeah.
I'm looking at Jamie Flinchbaugh, who actually. Okay. So what I'm doing with LeanPub is not, I think, as interesting. I'm basically just throwing content out there that I had published before on my blog. Now, Jamie Flinchbaugh actually published brand new material, a book on A3 problem solving. And so,
it's doing well.
I'm here on the page, and in fact, Jamie tweeted this. This is nothing private here. He tweeted that of the first buyers, he was surprised how many paid more than the minimum price. To see that behavior, and you alluded to what I'm doing with publishing my blog over time. I'm basically publishing it sounds silly, a best of 2012 book, and right now that book is just one chapter long. It's January.
Right.
And, the price is 99, or I think it's at 99 cents. Yeah. And then as the year goes on, I'm going to increase the price. So part of my experiment is to see, is there incentive for people to buy in early, because then they'll get all of that content throughout the year as it updates. So maybe that brings it back, Scott and Peter, one of you to talk about this idea of iterating the book. How often do authors republish?
Yeah, there's definitely a balance there. I mean, if you are putting out, say you wrote a blog post every day and you stuck it in your book every day, and then you sent an email out to your readers every day, that would be too much. There'd be fatigue there for sure.
So we've realized that, though. We build it so that when you publish, you don't have to email your readers.
Yeah.
Like when you publish, there's a checkbox, email my readers to mention that or not.
Yep.
And so if you check the checkbox, then you can type in some release notes saying, hey guys, I've added some stuff. And so we think you should be able to publish 5 times a day, once a day, whatever. But don't email your readers every day. That would get noisy, and then they'd end up going to LeanPub and turning off emails for your book.
Well, because
it's on a per book basis, right?
Yeah.
So,
but
we
like
recommend
once a month is no problem.
Right.
Yeah, every couple of weeks.
Because what I've done is gone back. If I've noticed a typo, I'll go back, I'll fix it, I'll republish, but without sending that notification out.
Yeah, and that's a nice way to do it. It's a nice balance.
So let's talk a little bit more about, you kind of alluded to it already, the lean startup methodology, as applied to publishing in a more iterative way, kind of helping test out, is there a market for my book? Is it providing value to people? That question of not, can I write a book, but should I write a book? Kind of borrowing, an Eric Riesism there. Kind of thinking of the book as a startup. Can you share a little bit about how leanpub.com itself, how you're running or looking at that as a lean startup of its own?
Okay. Actually, sure, but
let's give you an example first of how that's worked for one of our authors.
Yeah,
okay.
So we're actually really happy with this. So there's a couple things besides like being able to publish in progress. We also, when you create a book before you've published it, you still have a page, like a landing page, which shows like the book name and you can fill in and about the book section, etc. And we have a little thing that's like, are you interested in this book? Sign up to get notified when this book first publishes.
Yeah.
And so this is really interesting because it lets you do like the Eric Ries approach of like put up a landing page to see if people care, right? And so we think this is fantastic for us. So we've had one of our most successful authors, Reginald Braithwaite, or Ragenwald as the tech internet knows him. He's got the number 5 book on LeanPub right now. He's got a couple other books on LeanPub as well. But one of the things we're actually most happy about is he put up another book that was sort of based on one of his books, but like turned into a different language. And he put up the landing page for it as an experiment, and it wasn't getting the amount of traction he thought it would, so he killed it. And it's like, we just saved him a lot of time. And it's fantastic. So that's like, if you can fail cheaply, right? without hardly any effort at all, then you've got all this extra time to go and be more productive and do more meaningful things, right? Things that you think that have more traction. And so this idea of being able to put up just a landing page for a book and see does anybody care. If you have no Twitter followers and no blog subscribers, if you put up a landing page for a book, no one's going to care, right? And so there's two lessons there. One is get some Twitter followers and a blog. And the other one is, if you write a fantastic, absolutely amazing book, you can, get it to spread through word of mouth. And so this landing page idea won't necessarily be conclusive, but for someone who's already got a built-in audience, like if you have a popular blog or if you have a substantial number of Twitter followers, you should be able to see the needle move a little bit if you have something that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really cool concept. I mean, when you talk about the idea of throwing an idea out there and then killing it when it didn't get traction, that comes back to a core lean startup idea. When you talk about saving him time, and Eric Ries talking about, the worst thing you can do is have developers waste their time on software that nobody wants to buy, and so why not do the same thing with yourself?
Most books that are written should not be written. Right, like most books are a waste and a waste of the author's time, a waste of the publisher's time, a waste of the publisher's money, opportunity cost for the author, right?
Yeah.
So, but we believe there's that aspect. We also believe there's all kinds of books that should be written and should be published that aren't.
Yeah.
Because the author couldn't convince a publisher to publish it. The author was too shy and scared, and they kept this gem on their laptop for 6 years. Which is equally terrible, right? And so we think the books that should get written, and books that shouldn't get written, well, hopefully the authors find that out as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And then they go write the book they should write.
Go write the book they should write.
Yeah. Well, hey, let me ask you one more question before we talk about some of the lean startup-ish approach to LeanPub. One other question people might have, so if you're going through this iterative approach and you're testing the market and seeing what the feedback is, do you have any authors who have, or do you anticipate that you might go through this approach and then take the book to a publisher? So, lean startups often start very small, and then you actually have paying customers, and then you're in such a better position to actually go to a venture capitalist. Thinking of publisher as VC, have you found where authors can make a better case that, hey, look, people will buy this book, you should publish me?
Yeah. So I think the best example of this is actually Peter. And this is part of the reason why we built LeanPub, is the way that Peter wrote. I'm going to speak for him for a bit.
All right, go for it.
So the way that Peter wrote his first book, Flexible Rails, was the genesis of LeanPub. He wrote it iteratively. He started with something small that he was embarrassed to publish, and he put it out there, and he sold it on Lulu, and he gave updates to his readers. And it was all quite a kludgy little hacky process where he had to upload the book to a Google secret URL on his webpage and tell people about it. And there was nothing automated here. And then the end of that, after he had sold, how many copies did you sell?
I made about almost $20,000 of royalties while it was in progress.
Yeah. And then the publishers started coming and asking him, hey, do you want to publish? Do you want to publish?
And my answer was, I'm making 80% royalty on my ebook. What will you give me?
Sure.
And they're like, 10%. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Right. So the concept from negotiating is BATNA, right? Like your best alternative to a negotiated agreement.
Yeah.
So 50 years ago, if you want to be a published author, you have one choice, which is give the publisher most of your money. Right.
Right.
And so, it's the publishing industry sort of functions like a cartel that way, right? They all basically offer the same thing, which is 10 to 15% royalties. And ebooks come out. Well, those are books. Why should we change our behavior, right?
Right.
Now, strictly speaking, and Amazon has stated this very clearly, everybody but the writer and the reader is optional, right? And so LeanPub exists so that all there has to be in the world is a writer sitting at a computer or an iPad writing something, and then they click one button, and the book is published and for sale, PDF, EPUB, Mobi, can be read anywhere, by anyone.
Yeah.
And our job is to make everything in between just magic. And so, and we want to be one way of doing it. We think we're really good for in-progress books. I mean, there are other ways that work really well for finished books, but the point is, everyone's optional. LeanPub's optional. Publishers are optional. If you want to do a deal with a publisher, you can do it. But if you're already on LeanPub and you have traction, then you should be able to negotiate a lot better. I mean, for example, on my first book, I negotiated an 80% royalty on the ebook. right? And that turned out to make a lot of my mortgage payments, right? If I'd taken the 10% royalty, it would be a very different thing, right?
Yeah.
And so if you say, like, look, I mean, the thing was, so an example, so obviously Eric Ries has like the number 2 selling Lean Pub book. He also made a New York Times best-selling book with a traditional publisher. A non-Lean Pub example I really love is 37 Signals, because these guys are geniuses at self-promoting, right? And so they built up a blog with an enormous following, right? It's the signal versus noise. And so then their idea is, hey, let's basically make a book out of all our blog wisdom and self-publish it, right? And so they did. It's called Getting Real, and they made over $500,000 selling a PDF, right?
Yep.
Told no DRM, just a PDF, $19. It's like when I did Flexible Rails, guess what I priced my book at? Well, actually, I priced it $20 because I didn't want to be copying them exactly. But so the point is, they wrote this blog, and then basically condensed the best parts and made an ebook out of it called Getting Real for $19. Made over $500,000 doing that, and then what the greatest thing about them is, and why I love them so much, they did it again. They just took their essentially the same stuff and repackaged it again and made a traditional book out of it called Rework, which was the New York Times best-selling book. And then I bet they got a really good deal on their book contract, right? Because if you're the publisher, you're looking at these guys like, okay, when we published a PDF out of this stuff, we made over $500,000. Surely you could do better, Mr. Publisher, right? Like, they wouldn't have to convince anyone of like, is there a market here? Is there a following? Is there an audience for this material? Yada, 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 right? Yeah. And so think about Lean Pub in that respect as lead, like, if things go the way we want, then I'm sure Lean Pub will end up being lead generation for publishers. Like right now, I mean, I can look at the bestsellers page on Lean Pub and think, I'm positive publishers should be approaching these people. But the thing is, they'll have to offer a really good deal to get to, because if you're the author, why would you? And you can sell your book for $15, $20. Why would you?
I mean, it's totally changing the dynamic. Warning here, MBA word, disintermediation is taking place in the industry here. Because I'm currently working on my second book through a traditional publisher. In the interest of transparency, I'm getting a 15% royalty, which I'm splitting with my my excellent co-author. And so, if you look at if they sell this book for $60 retail through Amazon, I believe Amazon takes about half. Yep, then of the remainder, the publisher takes twice as much as the authors. Yeah, so
you'll get like $4.
Yeah, and
on a $60 book.
Yeah, I mean, if you look back in the day, the publisher owned. Okay, warning, Marxist language here. The publisher owned the means of production. They owned the printing press.
Yep.
And as an author, if you wanted your book published, you had to go to the person with the printing press. So that balance of the royalties kind of reflects that. Well, in this day and age, the publisher doesn't even own the printing press. They outsource that to a place that prints it, and yet the royalty still remains about 15% is about the best you ever get. So Amazon Kindle will pay 70% if you keep your prices
over $2.99, $2.99 to $9.99
within certain bounds, and Lean Pub offers more than that. It's your standard royalty is
90% minus 50 cents, which works out to on a $10 book it's 85%, right? Like on a $20 book it basically like at a $5 book we're a 70% royalty, which is the same as like Amazon. And as the price goes higher, our royalty gets better and better and better. And the nice thing about this is our royalties are so good, we stick a big, huge table of them on our homepage. So you can just look and go, wow. So I mean, representative ones, like for example, a $10 book on Lean Pub, you make 85% royalty. Let's think about it that way.
And I make that comparison not to be a whiny author who's complaining about my publisher, but just say, well, isn't that interesting?
Well, the thing is, why is your royalty on an ebook different than the print book, right? Yeah. Like that's because the thing is, when Lean Pub started, we thought, okay, you know what? We're not competing with anyone really except Amazon and Apple in terms of like being a store for ebooks, right? So we thought, okay, they're the best places to sell finished books. Right, Amazon and Apple, like Amazon's Kindle store and the Apple iBook store, that's the place you need to have your finished book, right? And you should also sell it yourself on your blog or sell it somewhere else. And so we thought, okay, we're going to price ourselves at 70% royalty is how Lean Pub launched. right? Thinking, okay, well, we're going to be the best way in the world to sell an in-progress book.
Mm-hmm.
An in-progress ebook, they don't do that very well. We do.
Yeah.
So let's be the Amazon or the Apple of in-progress ebooks. But the thing is that really, if you're going to take 30%, you need to have some sort of stranglehold on some part of the market. And so Amazon and Apple, they've spent all this money making these wonderful tablets, so they've earned their 30%, right? But nobody else can claim to have earned that. Yeah. And so we're like, no, you know what? We need to be, and we started LeanPub because we were authors. We're both technical book authors, right? And we believe, we're on the side of the technical book author, right? You wrote the thing. It's your work. It's your product. So we should pay basically like a royalty that represents that. Yeah. And so for us, the idea of 90% minus 50 cents is that because, and the interesting thing is at one point we thought, you know what, we should have 2 royalty rates and one for like expensive books and one for cheaper books and yada, yada, yada. But that was a weird thing. We tried splitting it where like over $2.99 it's this and under $2.99 it's that. But then it was like, okay, if I sold a book for $2.98, I'd make more money than if I sold it for $2.99 or something. It was really funny. And it's like, you know what? We want our interests to be fully aligned with authors.
And
we want authors to succeed.
Our authors told us, like a number of our authors said 30% is too high.
Yeah.
You're not Amazon.
Yeah, you're not Amazon.
And that was part of our,
you're right.
our customer development.
Yeah. So let me just jump in here. I'm going to call a timeout here. We're going to do a second. Let me do a part 2 episode with you guys. So to the listeners, we're going to do a separate episode. We'll explore more fully the lean startup approach that Scott and Peter from leanpub.com have taken. So that'll be published in the near future. Scott and Peter, thanks for starting such a lively discussion. I'm looking forward to picking that up with you in part 2.
All right, thanks very much, Mark.
Thanks for listening. This has been the Lean Blog Podcast. For lean news and commentary updated daily, visit www.leanblog.org. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, email Mark at leanpodcast@gmail.com.